here. Well, that's better than the pieces that I leave behind these days. So, you ready? You guys gonna be up here? Okay. So this year, the Bisque board decided that we wanted to have, you saw one of the awards yesterday, the one that we gave to Melissa and Lisa. But today, we are inaugurating a new award. Okay. Today we are inaugurating a new award. And you guys have already heard me speak, you know I can go a long time. So one of the things I do is make sure that I tighten things up sometimes by switching over to verse. So we're going to do this in a minute, and they're smiling because they've heard my verses before. But first I want to tell you what the acronym for champion is for Bisque. It goes to somebody who's continuous, honorable advocacy, monitoring, prioritizing intervention outside of the norm. So let's start by reflecting and taking a pause. The dictionary defines champion as a person who argues for a cause. But what determines who is a champion depends on your point of view. Here's what it means to Bisque regarding you two. Your vision, passion, commitment, and integrity is part of what creates your pedigree. Each of you is busy and in demand in your own field, yet you committed time and energy toward domestic abuse, which is often hidden and concealed. Your guidance and wisdom help pave the way toward what Bisque has become today. It is Bisque's honor to present you with the inaugural Champion Award. We appreciate everything you've done. Presented with deep gratitude, the Bisque Board.
So this is what the award looks like. We're going to unveil them here in a moment. But just to give you an idea of these two. I went a little too far. There we go. So you can go back to the camera. Kathy and I are splitting up these awards. I'm going to say a few words about our friend, my friend, Libby Hines, and Kathy's going to talk a little bit about Debi Cain. But I can tell you this from my heart. I love both these women here. They have done more for the state of Michigan, for survivors in the state of Michigan than anyone I know. And I also know that the people who know them share my thoughts and share my heart with their appreciation, admiration, and love for both of them. I've known them both for, I think, over 30 years. So specifically in talking about Libby, I knew Libby when she was a prosecutor, worked with her back when we took CCR notes, law enforcement officer with one of those little golf pencils, taking notes with pencils. You remember those days? Some of them don't. Okay. Well, pencils are these little pieces of wood with graphite in them. No. There's so much to say about Libby. And she is known around the world for her measured and innovative presence on the bench. After she became a judge, prior to that as a prosecutor, her compassion for kids, her compassion for survivors of domestic violence, her fairness from the bench with offenders, her willingness to be creative, her ability to work with the energy of Jim Henderson, and to harness the creativity that came through the 15th District Court of Ann Arbor, to be a part of the Jody project that witnessed $10 million coming into this very county from 1990 to 1995, to the innovations that came with that, to the creativity that went on before that, for the award that is named after her, for the countless survivors that her care and heart has touched. We appreciate you, Libby. And with that, I want to give you this award and the wonderful little bag that it came with as the first ever Bisque Champion Award.
Thank you so much, Debi. Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Hagenian. I'm also a Bisque board member, and it is such an honor and a privilege to be here to help make these awards to two women who I also have known for so very many years, and am so honored to call colleagues and even more privileged to call friends. I'm going to speak just a little bit about Debi. And I'm usually not nervous speaking, but when I get to talk about them and talk about Debi, I'm a little emotional. So I said I'm a little emotional, so I'm going to put on my glasses and read my notes because I don't want to miss anything. Many of you, whether you're from Michigan or not, know Debi Cain and know her work. Her incredible, groundbreaking work and her incredible passion and dedication for survivors, for advocates, for survivor programs, for prevention, for systems change work in domestic violence and sexual assault. And if you don't know Debi, then ask one of us in the room who do know her, and we'll tell you all about her and how lucky we are. Or you could just read her bio, which is incredible too, and you can just get just a thumbnail sketch of all that she has done and to contribute. But what many people don't know, and by the way, Debi was also a founding mother of our state coalition, the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic Violence then, and now the Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. But many people don't know the role that Debi has played as a champion for Bisque and for battering intervention work. And I just want to mention a couple of those parts of her work, of your work, Debi, so that people know about that too. Even before there was a Bisque, Debi was a champion for battering intervention services. And I know she's going to talk more about that, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but I'll just mention a preview of coming attractions that Debi is the founding executive director of Haven, which is the Oakland County, Michigan domestic and sexual violence program, survivor-centered and prevention program in our state. Debi, from the very inception of Haven, ensured that there was a battering intervention component to the services that Haven provided because she knew and she had heard survivors wanted and needed that too. So there hasn't been that silo in Debi's work, and because of Debi's work, there hasn't been that silo in Michigan's work because Haven was one of the first programs in our state, and battering intervention, yes, absolutely, was right there from the start. And that is groundbreaking, right? Couple other things quickly. When Bisque was created, Debi has been not only supportive but instrumental in so many of the different ways, so many concrete ways in our organizational development, our philosophical development, and helping us navigate community, statewide, and sometimes political landmines, and offering her expertise and wisdom and perspective. Always there, drop of a hat. Debi, can we talk to you for a little bit? Can you help us think something through? Will you come to a 2-day retreat to help us talk about organizational structure? Never hesitated, always there. And then the last thing I'll mention, because I do want to leave time for their incredible presentation that I know is coming up, but we've mentioned this morning and other times the scholarships to ensure that the advocacy, voice, and presence is always here at Bisque conferences that was Debbie's brainchild. That was Debbie's work to help us make sure. So the scholarships that have been provided for, I don't even know how many years now, for advocates to come to BISME conferences is because of Debbie Cain. When she went to work with the Michigan Division of Victims, well, the Michigan Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention and Treatment Board, now Division of Victim Services. Debbie led that in our state for over 20 years, and we will be forever grateful for that as well. So I could go on. I won't, because I want you to hear from them, but I couldn't be more pleased, more honored, or more privileged to present this award to my dear colleague, mentor, and friend, Debbie Cain.
So with that in mind, the sign-in code for this session is good. And I'm going to turn this over to you, Libby.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, I don't have the microphone up here.
Way to go.
Right here. Okay. All right, is this working? Or should I just?
Nope, we got it. We got it.
Oops. All right, I'll try again. Is this working? Okay. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, thank you so much, David, for the kind and generous remarks. I've been coming to these BISME conferences for many, many years, and it is truly an honor to receive this wonderful award. It's also very humbling to get an award for the work that I am so privileged to do. And because I admire so many people in this organization, I've learned so much from all of you, and you've always inspired me. So it's a special honor, and to receive it today with one of my heroes, the legendary Debbie Cain, makes it even more special. But I will share it with everyone because, quite honestly, anything good I've ever done is probably something I learned from victims, the defendants themselves, or someone here, someone I've worked with, or you experts at BISME. So it really means a lot to me. I thank you very much. Today, Debbie and I, to paraphrase David Garvin, Debbie and I don't have all the answers, but we've heard many of the questions over the many years we've both practiced. And the fact is, there are no easy answers. There's just a lot of hard questions. So we want to share with you today a few things, our perspective and experience that have worked for us. We're not trying to tell you what to do or say ours is the best way, but hopefully give you some ideas as we all move forward. And I would start out by saying I'll be using he for defendant and she for victim to represent the vast majority of cases, just in the interest of time. I had the luxury of having Lisa Lawrence in my jurisdiction, so not only did I benefit, but so did all the women convicted of using force. So I'm not talking about that today. We've certainly heard so much wonderful information yesterday. Flip my slide here. As you can see here, we have good work. The good, as opposed to the bad and the ugly, is working together in a community response. And of course, a truly ideal situation would be a coordinated community response like Mika and Melissa were talking about. But you can actually get a lot done with an uncoordinated community response as well, and I speak from personal experience. But from a judicial point of view, BIPs are incredibly helpful as we all strive for the same goal, which is making it safer for the safety and well-being of victims and their children, and offender accountability in that order. So please also note that we say community response. working together. Kathy Hagenian always reminds me, response requires some action. It's not just showing up at a meeting and putting names to faces, which has some value, certainly, but it's actually doing something. And I don't know about you, but I've been on a lot of task forces that were really strong on the force, but pretty weak on the task. So instead of pointing fingers, like Mika and Melissa were talking about, we should join hands and try to form a safety net. Because we have so much to teach each other and learn from each other. So in my experience, it's critical to understand the role each of us has in the CCR, what each partner can do, but equally important is what we can't do. Many times I heard police officers and probation officers as well complain, I'm not working with advocates or CPS because they never give any feedback after I make my report. Well, once they understand the important confidentiality limitations, then they can work together. Judges can play a useful role in your CCR. We can use our position to bring people to the table, for example, and whether any of us thinks that's fair or right, the fact is people do usually respond to an invitation from a judge. We have some limitations, however. In every state, there are canons of judicial ethics that we have to comply with. So we can't discuss the facts of a particular case, but we can work on systems improvement. And judges can be a part of a CCR. Sometimes they use the canons as an excuse not to participate, but we can. But we can't discuss individual cases. And also, we can't engage in ex parte communications. We can't talk to just one side. So, for example, if I'm going into court to do a DV arraignment, the officer that I happen to know runs up and says, hey, Libby, this guy's also a suspect in 3 home invasions. We can't do that. And you shouldn't know that anything you tell us about the facts of a case, we have to share with both sides, the defense and the prosecution. So you build that into your system. Judges in a CCR can tell about and explain legal processes that might seem confusing. But having said that, I think it's really important not to be constrained by those legal processes. In my opinion, what you should do is figure out what you want, then figure out a way to get it ethically and legally. So, as a quick example, a DV bond violation in Michigan, the officer can write a piece of paper on a form and submit it to the court. Well, he or she files it with the clerk. It goes into a file. A judge may never see it until the case is back up on the docket. It could be weeks later. So no action is taken. We wanted to change that. So in our CCR, we developed a process where officers came directly, filed it with the DV judge's offices. So we could immediately look at it, take some action, issue a bench warrant if it was serious, so immediate arrest, or if it was safe to wait, issue an order to show cause for a hearing as to why he shouldn't be in contempt. But to me, the most important reason why a judge is good for a CCR is what we have to learn from all of you. And I certainly have. We learn about real life legal and non-legal barriers and dangers for victims, why we should respect victim autonomy, even if it seems like the decision is counterintuitive to us. Batter intervention experts teach us about the behavior of batterers, how they may undermine a parenting plan that later gets blamed on the mother, how they are very skillful sometimes at identifying weaknesses and manipulating people, even judges. And it won't surprise you to know that when that person's in front of me in court, they're usually very charming. So if I can go to my next slide. Procedural fairness is the legal terms, which is something that has been discussed a lot at this conference, but it takes time. Research shows that when people are listened to fairly, when they have an opportunity to speak and they're treated with respect, they're more likely to comply with court orders, even if they disagree with the order. So I learned from BIP experts that batterers push the envelope. So our orders need to be really clear and really specific. So a judge rushing through an arraignment that says, don't have any contact with your wife, what does that mean? When he's later found at the house, he tells the police, but she invited me over, and no arrest is made. So we solved that problem by doing what I learned from David Garvin and Jeff Cabe, by being really clear and specific as to what we mean by no contact. It takes time, but in every single case where there's a no contact order, I believe judges need to explain in detail what that means. I'm not going to read this, but it's not just saying you can't go where she lives, can't go where you work, no text, no writing, obviously slower and clearer. But it also means, like, if you have her programmed as a contact in your phone, take her out, delete it, because it will not be a defense to me that you accidentally contact her. I'm telling you to make it so it can't happen. And that also solved the issue of hang-up calls, because there were cases where the victim was being harassed by hang-up calls that were traced to the defendant, but he said it was an accident. Well, explaining things like this just dramatically reduced any claim of any kind of violation of that nature. It really requires a shift in mindset for criminal justice partners, but it doesn't require extra money or a grant to be creative. And I know that's true because before we had grants, and we've been so fortunate in my jurisdiction to have large federal grants over many years, but before that, we were still doing many of the things, and we were really creative. And in my opinion, innovation isn't just tweaking what you have. I've seen people try to bend the system like a pretzel to put things in different boxes. Again, I think the best way to approach it is to figure out what you want and then get there. I mean, you have to do it legally and ethically, but it can be done. I call it thinking outside the bench. The criminal justice system is also incredibly incident specific. So someone's supposed to be tried on what they're charged with, not the fact they had a sex offender conviction 2 years ago. The jury's only going to know the facts of the case in most circumstances. But I've learned from all of you, in DV cases, context is everything. So also, we judges need to know that the case we have in court in front of us might look really minor, but in fact, it's just the tip of an iceberg of potential lethality. I learned from, I believe, a BISME conference when Andy Klein spoke that he only needs to break her arm once. The next time she knows the look and she'll do what she wants. So the case I'm seeing might look minor and in fact be very serious. So I need to know the context. Scott Miller, who worked with Ellen Pence as well in the Duluth model, CCR expert, he pointed out that the judge in the courtroom is the person who knows the least about the case. Oftentimes in the past, before our coordinated response or uncoordinated coordinated response, I would just have a piece of paper indicating that, the defendant assaulted his wife on a particular date. That's it. Then I have to decide, is it safe to release that person, or should he stay in jail? Should I set bond conditions? If so, what should I set? But I didn't have the information, and it could be a life and death decision. So with emerging criminal justice reforms that are going on around the country, and certainly they're needed, but there's a lot of pressure on judges to not put people in jail, including in domestic violence cases. So how do you ethically and legally get the judge the information that you want him or her to have? Our CCR, which included David Garvin, a BIP representative, defense attorneys, prosecutors, judges, advocates, and probation, developed a form that we filed in every single DV misdemeanor case that was basically giving me context, prior history, prior arrest, specific facts I should know, threats, which are really important, and if a weapon was used. At least that was more information, so I'd make a more informed, better decision. Also, we created an order, a form, so that in every case, the defendant would leave the courtroom with the conditions already printed out clearly, so you can read. They'd been gone over very thoroughly. And there was even a box we created in the middle in bold where he would sign, I understand that if I violate these conditions, I'll be arrested. And he would leave the courtroom with it. And again, it dramatically increased compliance with court orders. I think also that BIPs play a critical role in keeping people safe. I learned it was a mistake to expect BIP providers to be put in the position of a probation officer. DV probation needs to stay in close touch with BIPs, but BIPs should not be trying to catch people up. You are giving the person a respectful opportunity to change. So when BIP providers and probation work together well, in my experience, compliance is greatly increased. They're far more likely to complete the battering intervention program, and therefore, I think people are safer. And then there's the law of demand and supply, to borrow David Garvin's phrase. Whatever your system needs in your jurisdiction, you and your CCR should figure out what that is, agree, and then figure out a way to get it. For example, in my community, we needed a BIP that were Spanish-speaking people. David Garvin created it. There were a certain percentage of people who absolutely could not afford the fees. David put a BIP in our homeless shelter, which was in walking distance of the court. Some defendants are just too dangerous to release, and I'm sorry, they belong in jail. So we wanted them to have the benefit of the same information, so David put his program in the jail. Now Jim Henderson is running that program. Specialized dockets were created for domestic violence cases with post-conviction judicial reviews where I would see and make sure that everyone was complying with what was ordered. It's so much safer for people. I can stagger the leave times. My bailiff knows to watch for intimidation. I can make sure that the victim leaves first. The defendant waits a period of time, never the other way around because you don't want him waiting at her car for her. But there's so many ways to make people safer in that particular setting when the cases are just there. And I learned from advocates, BIP providers, and victims themselves how important what I'll call quality of life issues are. For example, restitution. And it's not always money. I'll give you a quick example. A defendant and the victim worked, they were bus drivers. They worked for the same employer. Ex-husband assaulted her at work. I could collect and order the restitution for the medical expenses she incurred because of the assault, but what she was really upset about was that she had to use 8 of her sick days. So my DV probation officer, I've had phenomenal ones. Jim Henderson and now David O'Black, and Jim trained Dave, so he's also excellent. But anyway, Jim worked with the parties, and the short version is I was able to order restitution where the defendant transferred 8 of his sick days back to the victim. So one size may fit all, but it doesn't, may fit most, but it doesn't fit all. So just a quick example, if a victim comes into court and wants to lift a no contact order, for example, I'm trying to think like, I'll never know the real reason why, and I sure don't want to ask her in open court. It might not be safe for her to tell me. Does she know she has other options? When a judge does a no contact order, it's not an all or nothing thing. We can modify it and tweak it to suit the circumstances. So we developed a system where she could safely get the information and it would be relayed to me through my DV probation officer, and advocates were present as well, but of course I never asked them because they have a confidential relationship. But basically, I could lift the order. Maybe she doesn't really want contact, but she needs help with childcare. So I could amend the order to say no contact except by text or email. That's a written record, and so for purposes of childcare arrangements. There's a written record, not the phone, because there's lots that can be said there, and then a he said, she said, not getting into that. But you can modify the order that way to accomplish what she needs and still keep her safe. Also, even if she genuinely, maybe she wants him home, okay, fine, but I can still leave the order in to protect her. Just change it to no assaultive, intimidating, or threatening behavior without the consent of the victim. And I tell the defendant, you can go home, but if she tells you to leave, you have to leave. Otherwise, the police can arrest you, and in our jurisdiction, they will. I saw how important and effective it is when DV probation works closely with advocates and BIP providers. I had a case where a DV defendant on probation for a while was with his wife, which I knew was, she had wanted him home. They were driving out of state for a holiday. His original assault, interestingly, had been on a holiday as well, but he punched her. She got back and she called my DV probation officer, who was Jim Henderson, called and said, what happened? And Jim said, well, the judge is probably going to put him in jail for a new assault. We can't tolerate that. And she started to cry. And she said she wished she never told Jim. She said she just had a baby, so she wasn't working. Her husband was the sole source of income. They just bought a house. If I put him in jail, they're going to lose everything and lose the house. So Jim and I talked about it. I have a very close relationship with my DV probation officer, so we can exchange information. I think that's really important. But anyway, he talked, and he went and talked to all the community partners. He talked to David Garvin at ADA, the Battery Intervention Program. He talked to advocates. And what I was able to order, based on Jim's recommendation and input, of course, was that the defendant, instead of just going to jail, he went to the Battery Intervention Program 3 times a week. David agreed he could go 3 times but pay for just 1. He also went to jail on weekends and holidays. She felt safer. He was out of the house a lot, and they didn't lose their house. So the order in which judges call a case on judicial reviews, I think, can be really effective and important in sending a message. Old school thinking to me is that you call the person who's going to jail and is violated. Everyone sees what happens, the consequences. I came to believe that the more effective, best way was calling first the people who succeeded on probation. So I'd have them come back, I'd hold up their probation discharge, sign it in front of them, hand them a copy, and say, you're off probation. You can say anything you want. I'm glad to listen. Most people chose to speak, and you probably won't be surprised, but almost everyone, and I'm talking like over 90%, I would say, anecdotally, would say that they wished that they'd had the information from the BIP program in school. They would never have been in front of me. So the work you do is so important and is life-changing. These are the same people who balked and went kicking and screaming into the program in the first place. I just want to make a point about a major difference, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, between reviews in drug courts and sobriety courts and domestic violence. There are significant differences, which I've listed on the screen, but one of them is just the demeanor and tone. In drug and sobriety courts, which I filled in, you know, AA, NA, people use first names, they don't use last names, they're the judge, for lack of a better description, is chummier, it's less formal. In DV court, it was Kathy Hagenian who years ago said, you know, Libby, a little caution, you might not want to be too chummy with DV defendants. They'll go back and tell the victim. Or she's sitting in court and observes, oh, the judge really likes me. She'll believe everything I say. So I kept it formal. It was good advice. The other thing is, and I know other people have different views on this, but I never held big celebratory graduations like you do for drug and sobriety court. Mainly because I was afraid I'd be colluding with a batterer at some point. I can be as positive as possible, always respectful, say as many good things as I know and can objectively verify the person did to complete, but I can't, there's no objective test like there is for drug or alcohol if someone's drinking or not, so I really don't know for sure. And I think we have a pretty good system in terms of getting input and ongoing contact with victims, but to avoid me ever colluding with the batterer, I didn't do the big celebration. There will always be detractors. People seem to think it's okay for judges to learn about PTSD, TBIs, addiction, mental health, and work with community partners in those specialized courts. But for some reason, when it's domestic violence, people go, oh, that's bias, that's terrible, which is one of the worst things you could ever accuse a judge of, by the way. So like many of you, I learned the meaning of the expression, no good deed goes unpunished. I've had, over the years, many times, people say things, you're biased, you favor women, or whatever. In fact, a judge in our county very loudly proclaimed one time that I was, quote, in bed with the prosecutor. You know, that's so offensive on so many levels and untrue, and I might have run the office differently. But I didn't say anything, you let it go sometimes, but my message is a simple one. It's kind of from my husband, you know, don't let the turkeys get you down. Eventually people see the truth. Education is not bias. And it takes a community to end tolerance of domestic violence. So people can disagree if something is domestic violence, like defense attorneys and prosecutors, but nobody likes domestic violence. It's not in the defendant's best interest to have a new charge or conviction. It's safer for victims that that doesn't happen. So again, a good battering intervention program gives a defendant a respectful opportunity to change. Success has been talked about a lot at the conference, and I've always found that difficult to measure, and I don't even know what that would be, because I first thought, well, maybe it's fewer bond violations or fewer violations of probation, but if you don't look too hard, there aren't any violations. Or would it be victim satisfaction? Well, that seems like that would be really good, but how are you going to measure that? And recidivism? Well, we know it's not accurate if you just looked at charges or police reports, so it's really hard. So a defendant that I sentenced to a long-term battering intervention program, David's program was 52 weeks plus 8 mentoring sessions, was clearly angry about it. He went, and I have to say, frankly, his wife appeared angry as well when I ordered it, but he went. He actually finished the program. Flash forward 2 years. Their son beat up his girlfriend. The parents took the girlfriend in and waited to call my DV probation officer to get their son into David's program. So one last story. Jim Henderson and I had a case in which the defendant did just enough to stay out of jail, but Jim and I, neither one of us thought he really internalized any change or really had any insight into his behavior. The victim chose to remain with him. Jim and I frankly considered that case a failure. Many weeks later, the victim wrote Jim a letter. And in it, she said she thanked all of us and thanked us for sending her husband to the battering intervention program. And she said basically that when we experts weren't able to change him, she felt like she'd tried everything. And she wrote to say that she had left her abuser and she was now moving on guilt-free. So, my answer to the naysayers is this: keep up the fight, don't be discouraged. To paraphrase a Japanese proverb, get knocked down 7 times, get back 8, get up 8. So I will just end by saying thank you so much for all you have taught me and all you do, and thank you again for this amazing award.
Well, I'm not one to do PowerPoints and that kind of thing. David offered to do it for me, and I screwed around too long, so I don't have one. And just so you know, I tried to do my own at home, and I am the daughter of a school superintendent who, when I was in school, was determined as his oldest child that I would get well-educated over the years. Hence, I never was allowed to take typing. He signed me out of that. He signed me out of home ec. And as my husband, who's here today, will tell you, I still can't cook worth a damn. I don't sew, I don't, do any of those things. So I blame my dad for all of this. But I'm excited to be here, and I want to start by really congratulating all of you who are involved in BISCME, and I have to tell you what an amazing resource they've been for us in Michigan, and I love that they're so involved on the national level as well. This being their 27th conference, I think is just amazing and wonderful. Knowing how many people have been able to attend these conferences and how much we all learn from a variety of different professions when we're able to come to these conferences. So I can't say enough about how much I appreciate BISCME. For those of you in Michigan, they've been very involved in legislative work and just lots of different things that have really helped a cohesiveness between victim and batterer services in the state of Michigan. And we're lucky then also to have wonderful people like Judge Hines. I'm sure many of you are out there salivating and wondering, why don't we have a judge like that in our county? Libby is indeed wonderful and has done so much. There are a lot of people in this room, including David and Libby, Kathy, Jeffrey, so many others who've been wonderful mentors to people like me who came in the field. And one little plug I want to put in that I think is ever so important for us in our field is to remember that new influxes of blood into our field is so important. When I came to Michigan, my husband Luther, who's here, we'd been together in college, and he had just gotten drafted by the Detroit Lions. Neither of us, yes, yay Lions. They're actually good now too, which is exciting. So, yeah. So now I can wear all that Lion paraphernalia a little more proudly than when Luther started. But in any event, we moved here, and I didn't have a job. We'd just gotten out of college, and I happened to read in the paper an article that the YWCA of Oakland County, where we live, had an opening, and they were looking for people to do volunteer work for them on a new hotline for sexual assault and domestic violence. And I volunteered for that hotline. And 40 years later, here I am. And this has been my life's work and my life's passion for all of that time. So I just want to remind us that, as I ran a domestic violence program and actually was hired to set up the one, Haven in Oakland County, where I spent many years before going to work for the University of Michigan for 4 years, and then the state of Michigan for a lengthy time as well. It's that new blood in, and sometimes it's the people who don't know anything, because I remember at my interview saying to the people interviewing me at the YWCA, they said, do you know anybody who's experienced domestic violence? And I said, no, I don't. And I never had that experience in my own family. And then as they started teaching me, and as I started going to workshops and things, it's like, oh, the people across the street, that's what it was. Oh, my dad's, assistant superintendent, he had those abusive qualities, and there's still so many people out there. I continue to be saddened and surprised by how many people, when we talk about domestic violence, even on a social level, and Luther will tell you many times at a party, I end up cloistered in a corner with a woman who starts telling me her story, and many minutes or an hour or so later, I'm still talking to her as she's expressing what she's gone through. So many people still don't recognize what domestic violence is, or that people that they think would never experience it, in fact, may have or may at some point in their lives. So it's been a gift to be a part of this work, and it was a gift to get to hear all the amazing things that my friends in Duluth do. I was lucky that because Duluth is so close that I knew Ellen Pence well, and she and I often talked, sometimes as much as weekly, not just about domestic violence, but our passion for the Green Bay Packers. And, and whenever she visited Michigan, I had to take her to the casinos, so that we're here. So yes, we had a lot of fun together, and she was a brilliant and amazing person who, again, I was lucky to have as somebody in my life and somebody as a mentor. What I want to talk to you about in terms of some of my experiences with batterers intervention, another person who made an indelible mark on me and on my career was a woman named Donna Miller. When I came to Michigan, really programs were just starting up. And as Kathy said, I was one of the people who actually set up the Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence for those of us. And most of us were in the metropolitan areas at that time. And there weren't a lot of rural programs. And even of those of us who were around then, there weren't a huge number of us. So the YWCA actually sent me to both Toronto and to Windsor, Canada, both of whom had had long-time shelters. They'd been up and running for 5 to 7 or 8 years, and they had much broader experience than we had. So one of the people who was amazing to me was Donna Miller. When I drove into Windsor, there was a huge billboard that announced, if you need shelter from domestic violence, here's where you go, here's how you call. It had their address, it had their phone number, it had everything that somebody would need. That was so counter to so much of what we were hearing in those early days about hide the location because he'll come after her. So I talked to Dawn about that when I went to visit them about that's interesting you're doing that. She said, here's the thing, all you're doing is feeding into his cat and mouse game. And he loves showing her that no matter how hard you try, he will eventually find her and she will never be safe. So we just say, come on over. We've got alarm systems and that kind of thing, and we'll have you arrested because you're on our property. So that was the first lesson I learned from Donna. And as a result of that, all of the years that I was at Haven, which was over 20 years, we were an open location program, and we were one of the largest in the state. And I have to tell you, we had great relationships with the Pontiac police, who, lucky for us, were just 2 blocks away. But we also never had problems. You know, if these guys came, we would go to the door and say, we'll, consider this trespassing unless you, leave voluntarily right now, and that kind of thing. So I'm not advocating that everybody should do that, but I do think sometimes we forget, issues like that. The second major thing that I learned from Donna was the importance of making sure that we do have services for batterers. And so right from the beginning, that became a priority for us, in Oakland County, Michigan, was looking at that. What she said, and what I found to be true in my many years of working in the field, is the number one thing battered women ask for is, so many want to stay in the relationship. Fix him, fix him. I want to be with him. He's the father of my kids. I still love him. Now, that's not everybody, but we all know it's a pretty big percentage of the women that we work with who feel that way. So almost immediately, we did set up batterers intervention services. And again, so many thanks to the people at BISC-me who didn't even exist right at the beginning of that, but people like David, who, bless him, had already done those things in Ann Arbor and came out and actually taught me so much, about, what that should look like and what it shouldn't and that kind of thing. So I want to, make sure that we all remember that, it's easy to sometimes reach a point that, like, that was way back, in the late 1970s. But a lot of these things haven't changed. And, if we don't have some of those services and such available, we need to be working to try to find somebody else who will do them if we're not the logical place. And so I totally support batterers intervention services and the importance of what it is that they do. I also wanted to mention the community collaboration, because Jeffrey and David had asked, and Kathy, that I speak to that just a little bit. And I will tell you how important that actually is. I think it's important for all of us who run nonprofit agencies to make sure we're doing that kind of collaboration, because the strength of community support comes from the people in the community, as our friends in Duluth pointed out. And part of that is the collaborative work. I also wanted to share with you, my life has basically in this field been one of learning lessons along the way, and many of my best lessons were lessons I learned along the way because I screwed it up. And then it was like, oh my God, that didn't work well at all. What do we do now? And I think, that's just a reality, that we don't always have the path paved for us. So one of the lessons I learned along the way was the importance of making sure that community collaboration did happen. And I loved what the women in Duluth did. Thank you so much. I loved hearing that and took great notes and that kind of thing. But the bottom line is that in community collaborations, it's very easy to make mistakes internally if you're coming from a victim service agency. And here's some of the ones I made, so try to learn from them. Be smarter than I was. And one of them was that part of what's critical about that collaboration is, A, as Duluth pointed out, making sure you have the right people at the table. But that also means, from within the nonprofit world or the BIP world or whatever, making sure we have the right people at the table. It has to be somebody who's willing to be collaborative. It has to be somebody who's willing to be open-minded. It has to be somebody who is a good team player. And I learned the hard way, as a fairly young woman when we started that that a couple of the people who I thought had a great amount of expertise and desire in this area were the ones that I assigned. One of them was perfect, the other one really wasn't. I mean, she wasn't willing to be collaborative. She wanted them to take this as training that we were giving to people on the collaboration, and that doesn't go well. So one of my lessons learned was it's so important to put the right person in those community collaborations and somebody who really can represent what a collaborative project is supposed to look like. The other thing I want to mention about that is that, the community collaboration and the things that we're seeking to do, it's, know your lane, know your lane in that. The realities are that there's so many creative ways we can do this work, but sometimes, at least at the stage that, or my experiences were, that often we were a bit set in our ways and not always willing to really hear from community partners. And that took me a while as a younger, more inexperienced woman to get there. And certainly for most of you, I'm sure that's something you already do. But those collaborations, and as somebody who stayed in Oakland County doing that work for almost 22 years, your reputation in your agency and for you personally as a professional will make you or break you. And, when you need their support on other things, if they've had bad experiences, those bad experiences don't quickly go away. You have to overcome that. So it's so important in the collaborations to really enter into it with the right frame of mind. And those were hard lessons that I learned that most of you are probably way smarter and wouldn't have made to begin with. But the other thing I wanted to mention about the collaborative change is that, I think being clear about what we're looking for and what it is that we hope will come out of the collaboration, but also of making sure that all the right people are at the table. I can't tell you enough. I mean, Libby was really, really modest up here. And anybody who's ever worked with her, I know all of my Ann Arbor colleagues, will tell you, what she has been able to creatively do in that community is nothing short of amazing. I mean, and fortunately, we recruited her for the board through the state, for the Domestic Violence Prevention and Treatment Board, and she was an amazing resource. We also had stolen, actually, from Duluth, Matt Wiese, who's a prosecutor in Michigan now, and had worked closely with Duluth and with Ellen Pence as well. So it's so important to try to, have those allies and have them help you. Libby's gotten us access to judges and the criminal justice system in ways that we could never have gotten ourselves because we're seen as biased. And so having those friends and allies is critically important. I also wanted to just mention that, we're really in a position that I think most of our successes sometimes come from the missteps. And it's having a board of directors and being in a situation with collaborative councils and all of those things to constantly be assessing your work and saying, hey, we totally screwed this up, but we've learned from it. We're going to do it a different way. And I think with partners, I learned along the way as somebody who was a fresh person out of college and hadn't even lived in Michigan, until I got out of college, that it's very easy to make those mistakes. But people are very forgiving when you're able to say, I wish I'd done that differently. I'm sorry, I will do it differently in the future. And I think that's what a lot of collaboration is about, is being willing to acknowledge that, things can't always be the way we want it, that we're striving for things that are going to be in the best interest of survivors, but that we come from a lot of different vantage points. Those are pretty much the things that I wanted, to mention. The other thing I would say, was a key lesson for me that I learned from Ann Arbor, and certainly I heard that in Duluth, and I heard it from Ellen and others, and I heard it from them today, is dream big. Anything's possible. Anything is possible. I have to tell you, when I look back on a 40-year career in violence against women and children, it's amazing what has happened. Things that we never dreamed could possibly happen. have come to fruition, because the force of the work we do, the importance of it, and the passion of the work we do, that overcomes so many obstacles. So, you know, I hope that one thing we're always doing, whether it's with our collaborative groups or whomever, dream big, because we can carry those dreams out. I do believe that very much. So in closing, I think, you know, if you could all get a Libby Hines, that would be great. So if you know a really amazing judge who's wonderful and kind and understands the law and is willing to work hard to make it work, grab that person and hold on to them as long as you possibly can, because it's amazing to have that kind of colleague, and they'll open doors that we haven't even thought about. They'll see avenues that we don't even know might be available. So that's one tip that I would have. The other thing I want to say is just thank you for the work that you do. It's not always easy doing this kind of work. As I said earlier, I think I'm certainly not at all unique in the fact that if you know, Luther and I go to some party or something, inevitably someone will say something, and then 60 minutes later I'm in the corner with that person still talking to her about her options and possibilities and, you know, who she can call and, you know, all of those kinds of things. It's hard work to do. And my kids have both, you know, our kids have both pointed out to me how many times we were on the deck having, you know, a cookout or something, and I get a call from a friend of a friend's, you know, who's a battered woman, and the other person has said, call Debbie, she'll be able to help you. And, you know, 30 to 60 minutes later, I'm just getting off the phone after talking to her. What we do isn't easy, but it's so, so important. And I know that's why we're all here in this room today. And it's why I appreciate so much all the great work that you all are doing. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today with BISCME and the amazing work that they do. So thank you.